CNN exclusive. Donald Trump Jr. texting strategies to subvert the will of the American voters before the election results of 2020 were even known. CNN has reviewed a text message from the then president's son to the then White House chief of staff, which states, quote, "We have multiple paths. We control them all." Those multiple paths would all be tried in some form or fashion leading up to the events of January 6th. The text was sent on November 5th. That was when it still looked as though Donald Trump could win legitimately. In a statement, Trump Jr.'s lawyer says, quote, "Given the date, this message likely originated from someone else and was forwarded," unquote. Among the strategies posited, exerting pressure on Republican-controlled state legislators, a la President Trump's infamous call to the Georgia Secretary of State. Trump Jr. texts, quote, "Republicans control Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, North Carolina, etc. We get Trump electors." The text also calls for objecting to the vote certification, quote, "We either have a vote we control and we win, or it gets kicked to Congress 6 January 2021. As you may recall, 147 congressional Republicans objected to the certification and counting the votes from Arizona and or Pennsylvania, even after the Capitol had been so brutally attacked. As the text message reads, quote, "We have operational control, total leverage," unquote. There are even more plans laid out in the text, which were attempted. Let's discuss some of them with my next guest, who was the White House communications director when that text was sent. Alyssa Farah Griffin, thanks so much for joining us. So when you were at the White House, did you know of this type of plans in the works?
Well, Jake, first off, thanks for having me, and I really, really appreciate your reporting from Ukraine. It's invaluable. I certainly wasn't aware, but I can tell you this. Those final days, even before the election was called, but once the Arizona call was made and it looked like Donald Trump was not going to win the election, was a very scary time in the Trump White House. There was a level of desperation among those closest to the former president to hang on to power in any way possible. You'd hear rumors of different ideas. I've shared before, I was supposed to do a television interview the day after the election. The results had not been called and was told to stand down because, quote, there was a plan in place. Things were underway, and the folks in Roslyn were kind of working out strategies of what to do. And I think this text is extraordinarily revealing. It shows that they were going to use every lever of the federal government, as well as legislatures that were friendly to them, to try to cling to power.
So Trump Jr.'s text makes specific references to filing lawsuits and advocating recounts. Now, those are legal venues. And they filed, and they lost more than 60 lawsuits, and there were numerous recounts, and none of them found any evidence of widespread voter fraud. Nothing changed in terms of who won those states. But how could there be a need for lawsuits and recounts at that point, November 5th, when the votes were still being counted? There wasn't even evidence of any fraud or evidence that Donald Trump had definitively lost any of these states.
Well, that's kind of the fascinating thing about the big lie itself. The Trump campaign and those senior advisors in the Trump White House had access to internal polling that projected him losing. Polling, it's a science, but it's not always completely accurate. But the results of the election at that time, November 5th, were not far off from what we had been projecting, with the exception of Georgia. But this just goes to show that before it was even the democratic process was underway or was even complete, they were thinking of what they could do to try to hold on to power. And here's what's important about this, two things. This reveals just how deep the January 6th committee is going. They are getting access to information from those closest to the former president, including his son, including his former chief of staff. That's important work that they're doing. But more importantly, this isn't behind us. 2022 is around the corner. 2024 is around the corner. Donald Trump is likely running for president, and he is already working to stack secretaries of state offices, state houses, as well as install loyalists in the House of Representatives and the Senate for precisely something like this again, if he runs and he loses, to be able to have those levers in place to have operational control and stay in power.
In March of this year, a federal judge called this all a, quote, coup in search of a legal theory. given that this text was sent before the so-called Eastman memo, which detailed a way that Vice President Pence was supposed to overturn the election, although obviously there was no constitutional way to do this. What other way is there to describe this other than a coup?
I think it's exactly that. I mean, this is literally talking, this is sharing an idea of how to overthrow the democratic process, essentially to overthrow the rightful government of the Joe Biden presidency. It cannot be dismissed as, Donald Trump Jr.'s lawyers are now saying, well, it may have been a forwarded idea of someone else's, but he shared it, which is sort of a tacit endorsement that he thinks this is something that should be shared far and wide, as the reporting indicates. I mean, this amounts to an effort to overthrow the government because you did not like the outcome of a democratic election. It's terrifying. It is absolutely wrong. And I expect that there's going to be more information like this that comes out of the committee.
Alyssa Farah-Griffin, always appreciate you. Thank you so much for your time tonight.